They call him a threat, whispers in foreign capitals, panic behind closed doors, all because of one man in Burkina Faso. But what has Ibrahim Traoré done that's shaken the global order? Why exactly do they call him a threat? Let's find out. Ibrahim Traoré didn't climb the traditional ladder. He shattered it. Most leaders are sculpted in silence, groomed by diplomats, softened by donors, and trained in foreign military academies to play their part. By the time they reach power, the system already owns them. But Traoré, he emerged like a glitch in the program. No grooming, no foreign endorsement, no waiting. 1 minute, he was a captain in the shadows. Next, he had overthrown a president, and not for personal power, but because the war against terror had become a war against his people. Traoré's rise wasn't smooth. It was messy, raw, and driven by the one thing the global order fears most: uncontrolled authenticity. He didn't ask for legitimacy from Paris or Washington. He didn't pause for a blessing from ECOWAS. He didn't wait for a press cycle to favor him. He took the reins because he believed the country was bleeding out, and no one else was willing to grab the knife. And just like that, the rules cracked. Suddenly, the West was staring at a man it couldn't predict. He wasn't educated in their schools. He wasn't loyal to its embassies. He wasn't dependent on its approval. He wasn't even old enough to be taken seriously by their standards. And yet there he was, commanding a nation with fire in his voice and dust on his boots. And he wasn't asking what they wanted. He was telling them what he wouldn't allow anymore. You see, the real threat isn't just what Traoré says. It's how he came to power. He didn't need a political machine. He didn't need a foreign backer. He didn't even need a polished image. All he needed was to call out the lie that everyone else had learned to live with: that Burkina Faso, and Africa by extension, would always need supervision. And that message? It didn't stay within the borders of his country. It crossed rivers. It echoed through desert radios. It was whispered in the streets of Bamako and chanted in Niamey. Traoré didn't just rise. He permitted others to rise too. That's why he's dangerous. Because when a man comes out of nowhere, bypasses every gatekeeper, and still ends up with millions behind him, that means the old gatekeepers don't matter anymore. Most leaders in Africa write long speeches about freedom. Traoré wrote eviction notices. Once he took power, he didn't waste time on diplomatic dances or symbolic reforms. He went straight for the heart of foreign control: the military boots, the financial chains, and the silent contracts that had ruled Burkina Faso from the shadows for decades. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. First, it was the French military bases. For years, they sat on Burkinabe soil like royalty, untouchable, unquestioned, and surrounded by a narrative of counterinsurgency. But the locals saw the truth. Every year they stayed, more civilians died, more towns fell into chaos. So Traoré did what no one had dared before. He told them to leave, not negotiate, not delay, leave. And they did. France packed up and left, red-faced and furious. Western analysts called it reckless. But for the first time in years, Burkinabe people felt the ground beneath them belonged to them. It wasn't just military. It was psychological. The empire had been told no, and the sky didn't fall. Then came the economic front. Traoré began untangling deals signed in the dark, contracts that sold gold and minerals to foreign firms for crumbs. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso started demanding a larger share of its wealth, not as a request, but as a condition for doing business. He banned certain foreign companies. He challenged mining giants who had long believed they owned the land, not leased it. And just like that, the global economy felt a tremor. Because this wasn't just one man asking for fair trade. This was a country saying, "We're no longer for sale." He even turned down offers of foreign development aid, a modern leash dressed as charity. Instead of begging for loans with colonial strings, Traoré invested in local industries, processing gold, growing rice, and building schools. Things that didn't make headlines abroad but changed lives at home. To the average African, it looked like common sense. To global powers, it looked like rebellion, because the moment a country realizes it doesn't need its sponsors, the entire system starts to shake. And if one country gets away with it, others will try. This wasn't diplomacy. This was demolition. And every empire built on African dependence knows, if Burkina Faso is rebuilding from the ground up, their time may be running out. The moment he told foreign troops to get out, reclaimed resources, and stared down the West without blinking, something started shifting, not just in Burkina Faso, but across an entire region suffocating under similar chains. You could feel it. In Mali, Niger, Guinea, places where military uniforms had started replacing suits and ties, young officers and frustrated citizens looked at Traoré and saw something frighteningly familiar. Not a savior, not a god, but a reflection, a young man from the barracks, not a foreign embassy, someone who rose not because of wealth or fame, but because he'd had enough. And that's when the panic started. Not in Africa, but in Paris, Brussels, and Washington. Because for the first time in decades, the virus of rebellion wasn't ideological. It was logical. It wasn't about left or right. It was about dignity. It was about ownership. It was about asking questions that were once too dangerous to ask. Why do we trade gold for food stamps? Why are we protected by the same people who armed our enemies? Why do we still sign contracts in French for land our ancestors died defending? People didn't need slogans anymore. They had proof. Burkina Faso was walking away from the leash and not collapsing, so the fear spread. Flags changed in Niger. Coup leaders quoted Traoré's speeches word for word. Young people across Africa began painting their faces on walls. His name turned from a man into a message. We don't need permission. But here's what made it even more dangerous. Traoré never told anyone to rise. He didn't export revolution. He didn't meddle. He just stood firm, and that was enough. Because nothing threatens a colonial system more than self-belief without instruction. The West can handle insurgents. It can crush rebellions. But what it can't fight is a population that no longer believes in its superiority. And Traoré, knowingly or not, shattered that illusion across a continent. He didn't just lead his people. He rewired their idea of what leadership could be. And now, the question spreading through every frustrated capital is no longer, what is Traoré doing? It's worse. What if our people start doing it too? That's when the West had to do something. Ibrahim Traoré was once a ghost to the global media. Rarely mentioned, easily dismissed. But as his influence grew, so did the Whisper campaign. And then the Whisper turned into a megaphone. Authoritarian, radical, dictator in the making. These weren't critiques. They were weapons. Because once the empire realized Traoré wasn't a phase, it needed a plan. Not to argue with him. There was no winning that debate, but to bury him under stories, articles, op-eds, think pieces. Not about his policies, but his danger. Not about his actions, but his ambition. They didn't say he was wrong. They said he was reckless. And that's always the first red flag of empire panic, when a black man leading his people is suddenly called unstable. But it didn't stop at journalism. Behind the headlines came the darker instruments. Strange disturbances in the capital, alleged coup plots that seemed to appear out of thin air, arms traced back to shadowy suppliers, suspicious diplomatic activity, and yes, attempted betrayal from within. Not because Traoré was unpopular, but because of the idea of him remaining popular while being uncontrollable. That was unacceptable. Foreign embassies quietly pulled strings. Regional powers suddenly became concerned about stability. The same powers that had watched countries bleed for decades now clutched their pearls at Traoré's tone. He was too bold, too fast, too independent. Translation, he wouldn't play their game. And this is the moment the world needs to understand. When Western powers label someone a threat to democracy, what they often mean is, he doesn't answer to us. Because let's be clear, no one sent weapons when Burkina Faso was losing villages to terror groups. No one cried foul when gold was leaving the country in silence. No one held press conferences when foreign troops failed to protect anyone. But let a young leader say no, just once with conviction, and suddenly the machine awakens. Still, Traoré didn't flinch. He spoke less, worked more, fortified institutions, reached out to allies outside the Western sphere. He didn't react emotionally. He prepared structurally, because he understood something crucial. They weren't attacking him. They were attacking what he represented. A generation that didn't fear the West. A nation that didn't need permission. A continent that could say, we've had enough. By now, it's clear. Ibrahim Traoré isn't feared because of the office he holds. He's feared because of the possibility he embodies. Let's be honest, Burkina Faso is not a military superpower. It's not an economic giant. It has no nuclear weapons, no seat at elite international tables, and no massive tech empire. And yet the world watches it like it's holding a detonator. That's because Traoré, standing in his modest uniform, stripped of Western approval, is a walking contradiction to everything the global system says about power. He's not supposed to exist. A young African leader who doesn't beg, doesn't fear, and doesn't sell out. His mere presence says, everything you've been told about Africa needing saving is a lie. And that's radioactive. He's a mirror held up to a century of manipulation. A reminder that what we call foreign policy in Africa is often just soft colonization rebranded. That what we call aid is sometimes debt dressed as compassion. That's what we call stability. It often means dictators who sign the right contracts. Traoré doesn't just challenge policies. He exposes the hypocrisy beneath them. Think about what that does to the global system. What happens when Africans in other nations stop dreaming of migration and start dreaming of reform? What happens when the youth realize that rebellion isn't chaos, it's correction? What happens when leaders stop asking what the West will think and start asking what their people deserve? The answer is simple. The empire begins to shake. That's why he's not being measured by GDP or electoral charts. He's being measured by something far more volatile: influence. He's being watched, not because he holds the reins of global finance, but because he's got something far more unpredictable: the attention of the unheard. And that's the one currency global powers can't regulate. Traoré is no saint. He's not perfect. But that's not the point. He doesn't need to be flawless. He just needs to prove that another model is possible. And if he succeeds, even halfway, then the house of cards the world built on African dependence might not just tremble, it might fall. And that is why Traoré is a threat to the West. Do you think Traoré himself is now under threat? What will they try to do to silence him? Let us know in the comments section. Can they put a waking Africa back to sleep? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.